Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mile High Discussions. My name is Hugh O'Brien. I'm one of your hosts, and welcome to the third episode of the year. Today, we're actually going to have 4 guests instead of 2. So our guests for this half of the episode will actually leave during the break, and we will get 2 brand new, fresh guests for the second half. So now I'll turn it over to our guests.
My name's Tawfiq McDonald. I attend East High School, and I'm a junior.
My name's Jackson Howes, and I'm a sophomore at East High School.
My name is Izzy, and I'm your other host for today. And today's topic is about social media. How do you guys think social media has created kind of a disconnect from people, like from reality?
Starting off where social media came from, obviously they probably didn't have the intention of having it be an issue that people would get disconnected from reality and that it would create much conflict. It was, designed as a platform of communication for family and friends, and then now has exponentially grown into something greater. And with that, I don't really think enough preparation or thought went into what the future could hold for it. And so now we're seeing a bunch of issues, not just only with disconnect, but a plethora of issues. But since we're talking about disconnect, obviously, main one.
To be completely honest, I think that it's not created a disconnect from reality. It's simply created its new form of communication, which in turn creates its own reality. So it's just a different form of communication that just leads us on a different trail of friendships, of relationships, whether they be romantic or impersonal or incredibly personal. So I don't think it's as simple as it creates a disconnect from reality, and it's creating a new form of communication that we just haven't seen before in the human experience.
Do you think relationships that are created on social media as real and as strong as relationships that actually happen in real life?
Well, researchers have seen that a lot of relationships that start online have been described as more superficial. Mm-hmm. Now, superficial isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of impersonal communications, or impersonal relationships, rather. That's kind of like your acquaintances, people who you know, but you don't really know personally. That's not a bad thing. Conversely, though, there is an acceleration in the patterns of communication that lead to higher level relationships, but that's inhibited by the lack of face-to-face communication. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. You do get a lot more impersonal relationships online, just by the sheer number of people that you're trying to communicate with, but you also get relationships that are accelerated in their ability to become very, very personal very, very quickly. It doesn't always flip over to face-to-face communication, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. As having an internet friend who you're very personal with over the internet, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing if you're not really able or even willing to have a face-to-face relationship with them.
What do you think about that?
Just to follow up on what he's saying, it's maybe not too much of an issue. It's more so about personal opinion and emotion, more so. As he's talking about, it has the potential to come out to be more so superficial in the average relationship seen online. But there is also a potential that someone is okay with that, and then that's their personal opinion, that's their personal emotion, that's what they're striving for, and that's what they're looking for. Like, you find a friend online, maybe it's not just for emotional support or just to talk. They're just to talk to, There's another means of communication, another connection, and I feel like that's starting to become seen a lot as an issue because it's happening on a day-to-day basis, and coming of that is usually a lot of people being in social in reality, and that's seen as an issue. Well, they're not in social in reality because they're still talking to people in reality. It's just they're doing it where they're comfortable, where their opinion lies, and where their emotion lies.
Yeah, I think. Do you mind?
Yeah,
I think that's an important. I think that's an important distinction. That once you put down or once you pick up your phone, you're not transported into another dimension. You're just in a different realm of communication where perhaps you're more comfortable.
Right.
I think that the the danger lies in relying upon that. So there's a correlation between loneliness and this and a propensity to have all of your relationships, or the majority of your relationships, online, because you get that lack of personal care, or
Connect.
yeah, exactly.
Totally. Do you think people can kind of hide behind a false identity when using social media, such as things like Tinder or Instagram, where they can kind of create their own identity that isn't exactly representing reality?
Absolutely. I mean, we were just talking about the broad subject of most people, but then of course there are the few outliers that do decide to go on social media for ulterior motives, for whatever that may be. And like we were talking about and following up on, opinion and emotion is just part of human nature. It's just what people are going to do. They're going to use resources to their advantage, and it's just something that's just going to happen with the development of technology as we continue to advance down this road.
Yeah, totally. How do you think age kind of changes that?
Well, age is a huge issue when you're talking about social media, because obviously the social media generation is more millennials, more our generation. So often you'll see that the older generations, they're using it as just a channel through which just to communicate, while we've created this culture surrounding these social media sites that's a culture all within its own. And I think that that has a lot to do with age, just because of the way that we are brought up. The older generations, they're brought up, their only form of well, I guess you could say that social networking, it's less of a social network but phones. It's a network of communication. It's just a lot simpler than the networks of communication that we see now. But those are simply just to talk. It's just you're not seeing them face to face. Now we have Instagram, we have Facebook, Snapchat, dating sites, what have you. So what you're seeing there is that these cultures are not surrounding communication, but they're surrounding the people that are communicating.
I mean, just to follow up on that, he's speaking of culture, and with age comes more and more responsibility. And as we're getting a lot more, as this technology is becoming a lot more accessible, as this social media is becoming a lot more accessible, to bring it back to our main topic of disconnect within, in connection to social media, that's definitely a part of the culture, and that there's not enough conversation and knowledge as the ages get younger and as they're getting access to this social media and this technology. And then that's when that starts to become an issue, that there is a lack of management, there's a lack of knowledge, and there's just a lack of communication with that general vicinity of that area that lets this culture sort of thrive, per se, in this day and time.
Going back to your question, though, I think it's also important to note that it's not necessarily an evil motive when people kind of put their best foot forward.
Right, yeah.
So you see things like catfishing, and obviously that's probably an immoral act, and it's rather disingenuous. But people putting their best foot forward, no matter the social network, no matter how simple it gets, that's something that we see because they have that ability. We're humans. We want to show people the best of ourselves. The unfortunate consequence of that is that kind of defines the individual, and when they're greeted with reality, that they're not really all that person that we know them to be. And that kind of leads to disputes between people. When you're greeted with reality outside of your phone and you turn out not to really be that person that you want to show yourself as, that, well, it leads to its own whole host of problems within the culture.
Right. Do you think like teenagers specifically being addicted to their phones and constantly needing this, like constantly needing to be connected, to be with their phones, constantly needing to be on social media, like how do you think that adds to the disconnect?
Sticking on our general theme of culture right now, how that adds to the disconnect would be that they're looking for some source of gratification. They're looking for some source of happiness within it. And we were talking prior about addiction and how it's very different, social media and drugs. But then when the two combine, it's actually quite similar, as we were saying previously. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that this disconnect within teenagers that has developed because of their wants and their needs and their own personal opinion, with a lack of knowledge, with a lack of communication, lack of education,
Right.
is what lets that disconnect thrive, and it's what lets that habit become an issue in the future, where now that they started spending 30 minutes on their phone, it quickly develops into an hour. It's not a progressive thing. It can quickly develop into an hour, just as a habit can quickly turn into a problem and then to an addiction, and then it
Right.
happens instantaneously. It's not a progressive process.
So there's all these pros and cons that we're talking about, and I think that it's really important for all teenagers to really sit down before they get really too addicted to their phones, because there are pros to social media. There's just people who are less comfortable in face-to-face situations, being able to develop those relationships, for example. There are those pros. It's just a matter of finding rules and finding plans that will allow you to skate past all the cons and just take advantage of the pros of having this ability to talk to people all
Right.
over the world almost instantaneously, which is something that no generation in human history has ever been able to do, and it's something that we've only dreamed about. So becoming scared and saying, well, just cut all of this out of my life, I think that takes you away from a lot of opportunities and advantages
Yeah,
that you might not have
totally.
otherwise.
How do we limit sort of those cons? Like many teenagers with cell phones, they use their phones and social media as sort of a distraction. They use it in school. They can use it at the dinner table and sort of just push away the rest of their own world. How do we focus on the pros of social media and technology use rather than the cons?
Well, I mean, we were talking about culture and going to what culture actually is. Culture is a way of life. So we're looking at how we can instill rules and barriers to prevent this from progressing, when really what we should be looking at is how we change the culture, how we morph the culture as it's progressing in this day and age. And like I've been mentioning, I will mention it again, lack of communication, a lack of education, and a lack of knowledge. Those three, in my personal opinion, are a main contributor to why this is become such a mainstream issue to a lot of people, because those are the three things that are not being addressed to prevent this culture from becoming potentially disastrous in the future.
How do you think, because I know when we were little, we didn't have social media, so how do you think people kind of learned social media, or how do you think people learned social media?
I think just because it's easier.
Right.
Because there's this idea of disinhibition where your guard kind of goes down when you're on social media because you're not really there.
Right.
There's no
Right.
Yeah.
immediate, just to the basis of evolutionary psychology, there's no immediate physical danger there.
Right.
So you can say what you want. Plus you get time to edit what you want to say to that other person, so you're able to put that foot forward. So it was kind of a matter of not how did we learn it, but why we learned it. And why we learned it is it was easier to communicate that way. So humans, like any other thing, are going to take the path of least resistance.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a pretty interesting discussion about how
Thank you
we
so
can
much, guys.
meld technology and culture and social media. But that wraps up our first half of the episode. Thank you guys so much for being on the show.
Thank you for
it
having
was
us.
Only a short time, but I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you guys did.
Absolutely.
And with that, we will see you after the break.
Learn what you love what you learn. Graduate debt-free from a certified program in health science, design, trades, or administration in less than a year. Opportunity comes from possibility. Come see what's possible.
Welcome back to MileHighDiscussions. We have two new guests, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
I'm Toby, and I'm a senior at East.
And I'm Riley, and I'm a senior at East as well.
I think this round we're going to open up with kind of a broader question. Having to do with Snapchat specifically, or I guess text, would you guys rather be left on read or delivered for like a long period of time?
Personally, I'd rather be left undelivered just because I know whether it's delivered, it's like I don't know if they received the message, opened it. It's more their personality and like I don't know if it's up to them for reading it. So it gives me more confidence rather than knowing for sure, like for a fact, most definite, that they saw the message and chose not to respond rather than they might have seen it, they might not have.
Right.
I would also agree with delivered because I know that personally I don't, use Snapchat a lot, and that's why a lot of people are complaining to me about me leaving them undelivered. But I'm just saying, hey, I'm not on Snapchat at the moment. It's not like I'm purposely ignoring you. So.
Yeah. What about like read receipts? I know I don't turn on read receipts for anybody because I just don't want people knowing. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, for me, it definitely depends on the conversation because a lot of times over text messages, you don't really get the tone that you're trying to express because you aren't face to face, and so you can't read body language or eye contact or anything like that. And so if it comes to the point, like being left on read definitely sends a message that sometimes you don't get, especially over text. And so for some conversations, I definitely see the point of using read receipts, but I normally have mine off, and nowadays you can choose like for specific people if you do want your receipts on.
Yeah.
I just have them off normally. But.
Yeah. What do you think, Izzy?
I leave my read receipts on sometimes for some people. Because I'm really bad at responding, especially like if people ask me to babysit, I'm really bad at responding right away. So if I know if I have my read receipts on, I'll have to respond or I'll look like a jerk. So it kind of forces me to do that. But Snapchat, I'd definitely rather be left undelivered for sure, because I don't want to feel that instant like they're purposely ignoring me.
And what about like Snapchat texting versus like actually texting or Instagram DMing? Like I personally think texting is more formal than the other two modes. Do you think there are certain things that should be left to texting rather than Snapchat or Instagram DMing, or not? Is everything good?
I would say that I would agree that texting is more formal, but it really, I know like sometimes I'll be having a conversation with someone over text and over Snapchat, and they can be two totally different conversations, so it's weird.
Wow, I've never had that actually.
No, and for me, I think there are definitely certain uses that you want to use text messages rather than Snapchatting, and especially with Snapchat messages, because they don't automatically save, and if you do take a screenshot of it, it tells the other person, rather than like over text messages. Once you send that text, you don't know what the person who's receiving it is doing with that text. They could snap or screenshot it, send it to other people, they could be showing it around, rather than with Snapchat texts. As soon as you swipe over and swipe back, it's deleted.
Do you think it's good that they get deleted after 24 hours? Or not even 24 hours, just, yeah.
I think in some cases, I mean, if it's a conversation that you don't really need documented, it won't be. And you don't really have to go through the effort of like deleting your text messages, and it doesn't use data like text messages do. But then you can still have the option to save them, but it also lets the other person know you save them. So it's much more open about whether or not your text messages on Snapchat are being shared.
Kind of branching off, do you, would you guys rather be like rejected, rejected over social media or over a screen like Snapchat or even Instagram rather than in person?
Definitely in person.
It's just more respectful, right?
Yeah, it's just real, and a lot of people can just, like Riley was saying, those like face expressions as well as body language are so crucial to reading what the other person has to say, and that's why doing something that important in person is more beneficial to both parties.
And also, if you're doing it in person, the conversation is happening then and now, and that you're only really having the conversation with that person, rather than if it is over social media or text messages, that it takes a while for the person to respond, and you get those 3 little dots that just build up your anxiety about their responses, and a lot more is conveyed in face-to-face interactions because you can actually lay out everything on the table, rather than I feel in conversations that we have over text messages or social media, we hold ourselves back because we have the opportunity to. Because you are behind the screen rather than in person, everything's already out on the table.
Do you think it's sort of good to like hold back? Because I know some people let their entire lives out onto social media and not like take anything and keep their privacy to them.
Right.
Do you think
how much of your privacy is kind of compromised using social media?
I think your privacy is completely compromised because
Right.
you're letting practically the whole world see into your life that normally they wouldn't see. And nowadays you have so many things that happen with like the Facebook getting hacked, and I know a bunch of people my age whose Instagram accounts just have been hacked, and you can find out personal information and family and friends and stuff like that just from your social media account or places that you've been. I know Instagram got rid of the feature, but they used to have it had the location of where you published your photos from. And if you published a lot of photos from your house, if somebody followed your profile, or if you were a public profile, you could click on that icon and see where the majority of the photos were posted.
Right.
But I think that there's two things here, which is that people getting hacked, having their privacy compromised that way, but a lot of people are compromising a lot of what used to be kept private now and posting it on these platforms. And I think some people that complain about the privacy being compromised on social media aren't doing everything they can to prevent their own social medias
Right.
from being too public.
Yeah, and nowadays you have schools, even high schools, starting to teach social media marketing, and it's the new platform of how the marketing world works, and not even just media like it used to be, magazines and television commercials, but now social media is the platform, and now on Instagram you can get specifically recommended ads based upon your interests, and that's just using data information from users.
Do you think social media makes your life better or it makes you happier?
Personally, I don't think it does. To me, it's just another added level of something that I have to do, something I care about, like almost more anxiety into my life, because it's not just what you have to post on your social media and what you present to the world, but it's also what you receive from the world. And you might see a bunch of people out having fun one night and then feel exclusion. Like in today's world, the term FOMO is used a lot, and it's the fear of missing out. And I think that social media really has created this problem in society, because now instead of just hearing about other people's experiences, you're seeing it, and you know for a fact that you aren't included in that.
And I think social media allows you to put this filter over it to make it almost look better than it could have been in reality.
Can we fix it though? Can we fix FOMO and all these bad things about social media and only focus on the good parts of social media? And how could we if we can?
I think that's up to the individual, because personally, I don't, I know that social media was really helpful for me when I moved, because it was the only way to see what my friends were still doing. I didn't have the option to be with them in person, so I resorted to social media as a way to fill that void. And then if you, I just took every piece of that information that I got from social media with a grain of salt, because I know it's not all going to be the same, and I know what they're like in real life, and I know what their social medias are like, and I can kind of balance those two things and see what's really happening here.
I mean, with everything, you're going to get goods and bads, no matter social media or pretty much anything else. It's just what Toby said with the individual. It's how you want to perceive and how you want to showcase yourself on social media, and that you can just use it to see what your friends are doing and check up on people. Or you could use it for negative aspects as well, but then you get all the marketing sides, like you mentioned earlier, that are all positive aspects of this new technology we have.
How do you think influencers, like social media, like Instagram models, can kind of change that?
Change the...
change your view of social media and change your view, because you don't really know them. You don't really know what they're like in real life. Like what Toby was saying, they're not your friends, they're not your neighbors. So, but they put forth this display on social media that you don't really get to see the other side of.
I think it definitely creates negative aspects of social media. Like you said, you don't know the person, And because you don't know them, all you really know of the person is what you're seeing, and what you're seeing is what they want you to see. It's what they want you to believe. And so I know a lot of the influencers that have been on social media, especially Instagram and YouTube, they've all had major controversies, and it's all of the negative aspects of themselves, like making racist comments, so to say, that completely contradict to what you thought of them because they never showed that aspect of themselves until it was accidentally released or accidentally let something slip.
What do you think, Toby?
A lot of these like kids really look up to some of these content creators and some of these like social media people, and then you know, to the point of what we used to like deem a normal celebrity is now just merged with this social media celebrity. So it's, and then they're looking up to this person, they're idolizing this person. When something does come out, there's a controversy that goes against what the person believes, then you have to take a step back and say, huh, this is kind of weird that I never saw them as that, but now I am seen as that. So how do I like react in that way?
How do you think those controversies can be avoided?
I don't think the controversies can be avoided. What I do think is that if we presented our real selves on social media, we wouldn't have this like kind of reputation, like and like responsibility to be perfect. We would just be another person.
Any last thoughts on that, Riley?
No, I disagree with what Toby said, and how expectations not only influence people who are looking up to these people, but also the influencers themselves, and that they keep feeling that they need to become this person that everyone thinks they are. And then that's when they get all these scandals or things that happen with them. It's because they let it slip, and because they weren't being themselves, it's this major scandal almost, because people are shocked to understand that this isn't how they really are.
What do you think the statute of limitation is on social media?
I think it's all about the user. I mean, no one's forcing anybody to use social media. It definitely is a social norm nowadays, especially in teenagers. But the amount of platforms you use, how often you use it, like Toby said earlier, he doesn't use Snapchat that often, and it's really up to the individual. So however much time an individual wants to spend on social media, I think is the limitation.
Well, the sort of false personas that people create on Snapchat or Instagram, do you think they're sort of exaggerated as you become more popular and as you become more successful? You have to sort of push this boundary even farther?
Completely. I know there's this docu-series on YouTube about one specific YouTuber, and they followed his life and his history, and it basically was like, because of his fan base, it kept growing and growing. He was forced to do more and more stunts and more ridiculous acts in his videos because that's what his viewers wanted, even though it wasn't him.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. This was awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching MileHighDiscussions today. I'd just like everyone to be reminded that we have Instagram, MileHighDiscussions, and YouTube, of course, just to stay caught up.
Yeah. Next week, we are going to be talking about music, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you guys again for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I hope you guys had fun. And see you guys next time.